So, what I'm going to do, there's a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about, but I think the most important is just to cover the journey we've been on. So, in a chronological fashion, just going to walk through the journey that we've gone on. I've been in this industry for nearly 25 years and went all the way from building a business in our garage to being acquired by a multi-billion-dollar corporate in Australia. So, I'm going to walk you through the journey. We'll probably take some sort of little side tracks along the way and get a bit distracted, but just to cover the journey we've been on and hopefully some lessons we've learned along the way for everyone in the room. So 2001 was my first year I really got into solar. I was a fairly troubled child, and until I discovered renewable energy as my passion, I sort of wasn't sure where my life was going. I didn't even finish year 10, so I didn't really have a lot to offer the world at that stage or much purpose. But once I connected my first solar panel, I was like, this is it, this is my mission. So it's really been my salvation in a lot of ways and given me something that I can really focus on, which for somebody with ADHD and those that are neurodivergent, you'll know what it's like that when you're struggling in life and you find your passion, it's really compelling. And I just want to run through brick walls for this energy transition. So I didn't expect it to end up where it did as an industry, but I just started with being really passionate about the pure simplicity of just powering anything anywhere from the sun. And obviously we've gone on to, build quite a formidable part of the energy mix in our country in Australia. But I never expected that. I just loved it. And I think that passion's really driven me all the way through. So in 2001, I think there was a total of 118 systems connected to the grid in Australia. Now I think there's over 4 million. So it really, we're talking about getting at the start of that sort of rise. Obviously, it couldn't have got in much earlier than that. This was about $20,000 for a 1 kilowatt system back then. Grid electricity was 16 cents for peak and 5 cents for off-peak. Solar electricity was around about $1.10 per kilowatt hour, levelised over 15 years. So the only market opportunities at that stage were off-grid homes, water pumps, electric fences and the odd caravan, and then eventually some small systems on homes up in the hills. But that was essentially it. I was working at a company called Battery Stop at the time. This was the only picture I could find of them, but that was where I started my business. I actually started in batteries and moved into solar, unlike a lot of people who've gone the other way. 2007 in Australia was really when the industry took off. John Howard did a lot of things wrong as a Prime Minister, in my opinion, but the one thing he did really well was encourage us to think about renewable energy, brought in the renewable energy target. But the problem is, and I'm really, really happy to hear everyone in New Zealand I've spoken to being aligned on this, you don't want to do what we did. $8,000 for a 1 kilowatt system paid from the government. Seemed really exciting at the time. We all got a bit carried away, like a bit of a sugar hit. And then we got the hangover later, which we're still suffering from. At that stage, there was between 3,000 and 15,000 systems a year being installed in Australia. 1 kilowatt system eventually became free, and then one of our competitors eventually started offering a $1,000 Coles Myer gift card and a free system for a 1 kilowatt system. So you can imagine what they did to distort the free market. Over 1,000 solar companies started trading. So, you talk about that boom and bust along the way, and another reason why you don't want to be advocating for incentives and upfront rebates in this country is because what goes up must come down, and we pay the price. And just for context now, there's around 1.3 or 1.4 million systems installed in Australia by a company who's no longer in business. So you think about all of those people being like your mum and dad or your sister that's installed a system and doesn't know where to turn when they have a problem. That's the level of damage that we've done to this industry by the sugar hit approach. So not something you want to be coveting, that's for sure. At that stage, solar was less than 1%, 0.1% of grid electricity. That was what a solar company looked like in 2007. It was an absolute horrendous branding, but that was basically the best-in-class solar company called the Environment Shop I used to work for at the time. And I think people spend a bit more time on branding and marketing now. No offence, Mick, founder of Environment Shop, but that was horrendous. 2010 for me was new beginnings. The industry had taken off, but certainly where I moved to follow my wife and raise a family to the coal country in the Latrobe Valley, clearly the appetite for the energy transition hadn't found its way down there. Coal was probably the third largest employer in that region after health and education, and no one had any intention of it dying a horrible death and to see the energy transition succeed. So I moved to coal country. The premium feed-in tariff was announced, so we thought there was a lot of tailwinds blowing through the industry. It was 66-cent feed-in tariff. Solar installations absolutely skyrocketed, about 200,000 per year. So we felt pretty bullish. Moved to Latrobe Valley. There was no solar companies anywhere. Couldn't find a job. Cal was 7 months pregnant. So we started one. And this was the first origins of Gippsland Solar, our first HQ. That's me loading up solar panels in the backyard of my little house in Inglis Avenue in Melbourne North, a little town of 2,000 people. on the roof of the Latrobe Valley. And I had a big TNT truck that used to come down the rear lane and drop off stock and do a 5-point turn in this little lane and piss the neighbours off so badly. And one day it tried to turn around and knocked over my entire back fence, and I think there's a fair bit of schadenfreude from my neighbours at the time. So 2011 still hadn't taken off. The Latrobe Valley still wasn't embracing renewable energy. People probably didn't even hate me at that stage, they more laughed at me. There's a lot of scorn and ridicule about our vision for a renewable energy future. There's probably half a dozen people. If you'd had a new energy conference in the Latrobe Valley in 2011, we probably could have all travelled in the same car together. So there wasn't a lot of appetite. So I was very driven, very committed to what I could do, and I didn't want to waver at all, but business was slow, phone stopped ringing, couldn't pay the bills, so essentially I gave up. There was no social licence, as I said. Solar was still twice the price of buying from the grid. My attitude and my approach was all wrong. I'd moved from the inner green belt of Melbourne down to coal country and tried to employ the same kind of sound bites. I talked a lot about global warming and climate change and net zero, and people used to laugh me out of their office or their home, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I think my belligerence and my arrogance about where the transition was going, whether people like it or not, was extremely unhelpful. And I've tried to educate people that are coming down into coal-dominated regions about this since then, is that you need to understand where people are and meet them where they're at, and not speak down to people or disrespect what that region has done to be the energy centre of the state, for example, for 60 years, and appreciate the sensitivities of that, because I think that if we can't get that right, the culture wars are just going to continue. So eventually, I gave up. A friend of mine got me a job as a carpenter, building the local secondary school gym. Helpfully, he told them that I had 10 years experience as a carpenter and got me on a really, really good salary. So I think I was on $40 an hour, and I came in, I didn't have a tool belt, I didn't have a measuring tape, and it was pretty clear on day one I did not have 10 years of experience as a carpenter. In fact, the first morning, someone said, "Hey Andy, after smoko, I'll get you to go and hang these architraves." No worries, mate. And I ran around to find Andy around the side. I was like, "Andy, what's an architrave?" So that was, I was a bit of a fraud, but occasionally the phone would ring and he'd let me crawl under the stairs and answer it when no one was watching if someone rang up to inquire about solar. So I did think I'd given up. I needed to pay the bills. I wanted to be passionate, but I was also pragmatic, and not being able to put food on the table for my family was a powerful driver. So essentially I gave up, and I thought that might have been it for the business. That was me going shamefully collecting my high-vis gear and giving up and getting a job. So 2013, things started to turn. Obviously, we started getting closer to solar being comparable to the price of grid electricity. The feed-in tariffs are really helping. System prices started falling. So eventually, we started getting the odd job, maybe one a fortnight, then one a week, and then 2 or 3 a week. And then we found that being in the Latrobe Valley and having no competition around was actually our greatest strength. So I think the early years where it felt like it was the worst place in the world to start a renewable energy business actually turned out to be quite an advantage, because no one else could do it either. And I think we learned a lot about how to, build transition, social license for the transition. But then once we did that, we found that, we didn't have a lot of competition. So this was kind of I think there was actually the peak since then as well. In 2012, there was 360,000 systems installed in Australia. Were the glory days. And I remember all of my friends running solar companies. They're out having 12-course meals and degustations and matching wines and living the life. And I was just thinking, what if this all ends tomorrow? Like, everyone was just having a big money party. There's a lot of Wolf of Wall Street kind of vibe about the industry. And meanwhile, we were at home in our little garage paying a fair bit of income tax and putting the rest away, for a rainy day, thinking that, this is great now, but what happens if it starts to tail off? But eventually, 2013, when a lot of those incentives, the feed-in tariff, was wound back, it shocked the whole industry. Most of those companies that have been living beyond their means, all the trailing liability and the income tax bills started coming in, and so many of them failed. We were able to use the money that we'd put away to purchase our own facility and move out into a shop in the main town. And I think putting our squirrel our nuts away for a rainy day was what really set our business up, because then we were stable and we could see through that first little dip on the solar coaster. So I moved out in 2013 and employed our first staff member. This was the day that I knew that I had to move out of the house. So Loy Yang Power Station in the Latrobe Valley, we've got the A and B power station. We used to call this Loy Yang C. And the reason we moved out is because that day, Cal couldn't get her car into the rear lane because the panels were blocking the driveway. and she was really pissed off. And then that afternoon, my little boy Lockie, who just started walking, he came out into the backyard. I didn't realise I was on the phone in the laneway, and he fell over and he cut his hand like stainless steel cable tie or something, and he had blood. He started crying. And I didn't see it happen, but I saw Cal looking really pissed off, and she stormed outside. And I'll clean the language up for the purposes of this forum, but she said, "Get this business out of my house." so I did. 2015. Now this was a fantastic year for the industry and the turning point for our business and for me personally as well. This was the point where buying energy from solar, in my opinion, sort of reached parity with buying from the grid. So now the whole argument of trying to sell more expensive electricity to people in the valley who didn't care about the environment, it became less important because it became just a common sense thing to do. Business would start installing solar at this stage. We did a lot of commercial work. We started doing a lot of 100 kilowatt systems. But it's interesting because the psychology hadn't changed, and a lot of businesses wanted the panels on the back of the building where the customers couldn't see it. And people still do feel that way, because in this region that I live in, they actually can connect this installation of a solar panel on the roof with putting their mate Joe out of a job at the power station. It's that binary. That's how people see the world. So it was still a challenge, but because it made business sense, I think we started to really take off. We moved into the Latrobe Valley. We dabbled around the edge of the Latrobe Valley up in the hills in my hometown for a while, but this was the first time that we actually went and opened a solar business in the middle of the valley, in the shadow of the power stations. You can imagine the ridicule that we suffered through that stage again. The same kind of Luddites and the people that really doubted us all the way through said it was a ridiculous idea. Then, just to really piss them off even further, we bought one of the first electric vehicles in Victoria, and we splashed Tesla Model S powered by renewable energy across the front. You think that didn't wind people up? And then, because I really wanted to drive the screws into them, we installed the first free and public EV charging station in the middle of the valley. And when we opened it, people just scorned and said, "You're the only customer going to be charging off that thing for 10 years because EVs are just a complete load of junk, and people live in the country, completely impractical." The next day, someone turned up to charge. So you think I didn't enjoy taking a Tesla owner's selfie with my first customer 24 hours later and showing the haters that, once again, they were wrong. And because I pulled my head out of my backside and changed all my messaging about energy transition, the council started getting behind our business. And one thing that we did was that, rather than talking about all of those ideological things that people used to get really wound up about, we started talking about new apprenticeships, new careers, new opportunities. We put up a picture of a new apprentice collecting his high-vis gear on day one of a new career in renewables. Everyone's like, "We love jobs." And from that moment, I think people started to get behind our business, and that's when we really started to flourish. And I always reinforce that the only reason we ever succeeded, regardless of my commitment, my determination and whatever, was the moment we started bringing people with us. That's the key to success. So it's one thing to be fighting against the system, but if you can bring people with you, life and business becomes so much easier. That was our first shop in Traralgon with the EV charging station and the Tesla there. All right, 2018, we decided to expand Gippsland Solar out of Gippsland. Again, people said you can't do it. It doesn't work. It's called Gippsland Solar for a reason. There's no way it can expand. So that was like a red flag to a bull. So we came up with a strategy of targeting the biggest commercial project that we could in Melbourne as a beachhead strategy. We lost a fair bit of money on that job. We thought, if we win this job, this will position us as the go-to company in this space. Back then, there wasn't many systems over 100 kilowatts in Australia. It wasn't really commonplace. And so we thought, we're going to put a flag in the ground here. We're going to chase one particular project. We opened a warehouse in the city. We first increased our workforce to 80 FTE by that stage. And as a result of all of this success, I found myself, especially with my background in the Latrobe Valley, I was getting a lot of requests to go overseas and do presentations and appear in documentaries and various things about energy transition. It was really, I think, captivating for a region that was looking for any sign that things were going to be okay. So we became kind of the face of the transition in the valley, which I loved. For me, I was probably driven by ego at that stage. I think I wanted the business to be built around me. I fronted the ads, to take on the big solar companies. We started a campaign called Andy from Gippsland Solar. And so I was the face, and I'd started the ad by saying, "Hi, Andy here from Gippsland Solar." And if you say that 100 times, you realise how dreadfully annoying it is. And to the point where on the footy field, people were just screaming it at me from the sidelines. Drove past my kid's school, my little boy Charlie and his mates go, "Andy from Gippsland Solar." So everywhere I went, I'm sure you've got the equivalent annoying ad in New Zealand, But yeah, it was good for business. So I enjoyed the business being about me, and I think it was about ego. I had a great team by that stage, and I could have actually empowered them and taken a step back and let the business flourish without me. But I think in hindsight, I probably didn't want it to. So what goes up must come down. In 2018, on paper, when we'd achieved everything we ever wanted, the business was flying, life was great. That 10 years of hustle, running faster and faster, and neglecting everything, and neglecting my family, neglecting my kids, my own health and well-being, working longer and drinking too much and making all the wrong decisions. That 10 years of stress I'd been running away from, as soon as I stopped and took a break in 2018, it's like the avalanche just rolled over me, and it was that quick and that instant that, yeah, I just had a complete mental breakdown, to be honest, when I was overseas on a break for the first time in so long. It triggered a whole wave of those attacks and just left me crippled to the point where I was laying on the floor with ulcers bleeding out of my body, and just the stress and seeing the phone ringing and physically just breaking into a cold sweat at the thought of having to answer the phone. It became that bad. So I learned a lot of mistakes about the old proverbial elastic band, that you think you can pull it tighter and tighter and eventually it snaps, and it can be that quick. So it's a big part of my mission now, is to tell people, yes, we enjoyed success and the purpose that we had really fueled us, but it comes at a price if you're not careful. And the amount of conversations I've had, even just in the last few days, with people in this room that can really relate to that feeling, I think it's really important, and especially for blokes. No offence to the women in the crowd, but you are better at this stuff than we are. And I think if a couple of 40-year-old guys can sit around and talk about their feelings like that, there's a lot of therapists who can be very nervous, because we can put a whole industry out of work if we're not careful, because I think we're their target customer base. There's a picture on every slide. Because you don't want to see a picture of me curled up in the floor in the fetal position having a panic attack, I'll give you a picture of the commercial job we won in Melbourne instead. This was Camberwell Grammar School. So this was 900 kilowatts, which was the largest private school installation at the time in the country. We brought a lot of innovation into this project. It was the first project that I'm aware of in Australia where we actually flew a drone around the entire site on a predetermined flight path. We took 600 images. It went back and used a program called Drone Deploy to build a 3D model of the entire school and map all the shading, increase the height of a tree or a building or anything to show the customer losses from shading and things like that. Knock the customer's socks off. So I think innovation was a big part of our key to our success. I'd love to have those conversations. Anyone in the room that's interested in that we went on that journey from the backyards of being acquired by REC. It was just lots of those little innovations along the way, thinking outside the square. So 2018 to 19 was a pretty horrible time for me personally, because, as I said, I spent probably 6 months out of the business, and I didn't really tell Kel, my wife, what I was dealing with. I was not really honest with her. I was trying to be tough, and I didn't tell my team, because I was this strong leader, this positive guy that always exuded confidence and optimism, and I really just didn't want people to know what I was dealing with, because it wasn't part of my brand, I suppose. I was just this optimistic guy. So I tried to hold on to as much as I could, and it's no surprise that just made the weight just increasingly burdensome on my shoulders and put me in an even darker place, to the point where I was running around my golf course at 2 o'clock in the morning in the pouring rain in the middle of winter, bawling my eyes out on the phone to Beyond Blue 3 times in one night, and just paid the price for years of neglecting myself and not thinking about looking after myself along the way. So it was a really horrible time. One of the few benefits to come from that period was that I also realised that the business resided entirely in my head at that stage, like because of the ego thing that I talked about and being a horrible micromanager. Every decision kind of channeled through me. I was the bottleneck. And when I was incapacitated and physically unable to come to work without breaking into a sweat, the business ran the risk of grinding to a halt. And it was a pretty big business by that stage. We're in the tens of millions of dollars of revenue. You can't afford to have a business that big with a bottleneck at the top. So started to make some better decisions, firstly about my own recovery. I took 6 months off. I eventually told my team, this is what I'm dealing with, and I don't know when I'm going to be back. And when they just say, you look after yourself, you do what you need to do, we'll take care of the business. I'm so grateful to them for everything that they did to help me get through that phase, because the guilt of putting extra pressure on my family and my team and everything was probably compounding what I was dealing with. So for 6 months, they said, you get yourself right. So I really just turned my phone off and physically couldn't do anything else. I just looked after my own recovery. The benefit of that was that we started by default, and unfortunately learning the hard way, started learning to empower my team more. And I'd never thought about what happens if someone wants to buy this business. The extent of the work we'd done on the exit strategy or thinking about succession planning was watching my 2 boys arguing over a trade for footy cards and trying to work out which was the better negotiator, and they'd be the future CEO. And I'm not allowed to say this in the book because it's really disrespectful to my oldest boy, Lockie, but it would be my middle child, Ollie, who's 2 years younger, and he just owned him repeatedly. Like, I had like a face palm. I'm like, I'm really proud of you, but I'm so disappointed in you. It's a Chatham House environment here, isn't it? And I remember one time I opened up the sleeve of footy cards, and Ollie had like page after page after page of cards, and I was like, how the hell does he manage to have something? He gets $5 a fortnight in pocket money. This kid's got more cards than I even know are being printed in the country. And I opened Lockie's up. He's 2.5 years older. There's 4 cards in there. And they're all shit cards as well. They're like, no. And I said to Ollie, I was like, how did you end up with so many cards? And he's like, trades. So he would have been the CEO. So that was as much as we thought about what happens if someone wants to buy a business. But because we started empowering the team and building these systems and processes, I guess now we'd built something that actually had some value to someone else. It wasn't really why we did it. It was more done because I didn't have the capacity anymore. But I think that was a happy byproduct of the work that we did in the end. So I say preparing Gippsland Solar for sale, but it wasn't actually the intention at the time. Happily, RACV ran a tender to install 3 megawatts of solar across all of their resorts in Australia. And for those of you who aren't familiar with RACV, it's like the AA here, but much bigger. It's about, I think the group revenue is about $6 or $7 billion and about 2,000 or 3,000 employees. It's a massively diverse organisation. And they decided to make a big push into the energy space. I didn't realise at the time that the first thing they were going to do was to acquire a solar company and use that as the foundation to build an energy strategy. And when they do things, they don't do it in halves. So, not knowing that this was the precursor, they wanted to put out a contract to install solar at their resorts, and if the company that won the job did a good job, they were going to be in the prime position. If I'd known the stakes were so high, I would have been, pretty wobbly. It probably wouldn't have been great for my mental health stressing about that, but we just thought we won a contract and it was great. Halfway through, they called me in for a meeting and they said, can you come into the office? The CEO of the group's going to be here. And I was like, okay, is everything going all right with the installations? I was, yeah, everything's great. We just want to have a talk with you. So 3 days later, I rocked into an office, the CEO of the group, the CFO, bunch of suits, lawyers, I assume, had this meandering conversation. And then they said, would you like to sell your business to RACV? I was like, hell yeah. I think I actually said hell yeah. I overplayed my hand pretty badly. So probably watered down the valuation a bit. But if you can imagine at that time, like everyone came to me afterwards and said, what a perfectly executed business strategy. You built this thing up, you sold at the top of the bell curve. It's the sort of beacon of success in this industry. The reality is that my mental health was so bad and the pressure of leading this team was so great on my shoulders that it was like bobbing around in the ocean and someone threw me a life raft and said, jump on. That's how it felt. So it looks wonderful and strategic and whatever, but that's actually the reality. So required by 100% by RACV in December 2019, and we got paid on the 14th of December 2019, 2 weeks before COVID decimated the business and the entire world. So I made some good decisions on the way, and then there was just some tinny dumb luck, and I think this is definitely the latter. And that's the day of the acquisition with Neil Taylor, the CEO of the group, and Nicole, the chair of the board, and my wife, Kelly, and I. So 2020 to 22, this was another very, very stressful period. So it had the payday. Everyone was telling us what a wonderful success it was. It felt, like a sense of achievement, but for me, it was really just the start of the most stressful period because moving into the corporate space, I never coveted it. I hated it. I just wasn't that person. You can tell I don't have a good veneer. I tend to call things out as I see them, and I wasn't good at playing that corporate game. A lot of other people in the organisation, frankly, didn't like solar becoming the new poster child of this $7 billion organisation and being put up as one of the key pillars of the organisation. So it created a bit of professional jealousy, I feel, to be honest. And that was really, really hard to deal with. For someone who didn't finish year 10, had never done his company director's course, I didn't have the skills to play the game, and it was tough. RACV treated us very well, but just the nature of that environment with so many employees relying on me for direction, plus the top-down pressure of the corporate space and trying to be in charge of strategy as the business was tanking because we couldn't get on a roof. We're the most locked-down state in the world. In Victoria, we had 260 days of lockdown, so it's not great for revenue. It was just a culmination of all these things weighing me down. So yes, 3-year growth strategy. We made 3 more acquisitions of other solar businesses to fuel the growth. There was 2 more in the pipeline when I just decided I couldn't do this anymore. It was too much, but was very, very ambitious. The workforce had got that stage about 190 plus 130 contractors, and with the other acquisitions had have closed, it probably would have been over 400 people working for us at that stage, which was just took all the fun out of it. I was so disconnected from the customer, from the teams on the roof. Like, I've still got all the Stanley knife cuts from doing main installs in the early days. Like, I loved being hands-on, and I was so far from that I just wasn't enjoying it anymore. We expanded across the rest of the country, and we installed a ton of EV chargers, big commercial projects. We installed a $10 million battery on a shopping centre. Philippe was talking about FCAS and all the other parts of the value stack that batteries can unlock. We've moved into that market and dealing with some big corporates with some big multi-million dollar solar and battery projects, and the market changed almost overnight. And then heavily impacted the business as we were trying to grow. So this was our team at the stage of making some acquisitions, and I always reflect on that photo and think about me in the third bedroom urban north in my little hometown and how we got to that point. And I just can't believe that we managed to get to that point. And it's not about the financials or anything. For me, it's just about the people. I look at all of those people and think all of their journeys, the people I invested in, I saw something in. There's former Hazelwood power station workers in there. There's kids whose dads worked in the power industry and coal-fired power for their whole lives and encouraged their kids to get into renewables. There's so many stories of people who've taken opportunities and are still working in the valley, in the coal country of the valley, but in renewable energy, which I think is the thing that I reflect on the most, is the opportunities we created. And then 2023 in June, my contract ended and I was done. So day one, I handed back the keys and I said, thanks, but no thanks. I think the team were very surprised, but I think that means I left at the right time. And I think for any founder who's ever sold their business and had to work out when to exit, knowing when's the right time, because you're so emotionally connected and you take it on your shoulders. It's not a job. It really still is your baby, even if you've given up 100% control. And I couldn't deal with that. But I felt that it was the right time to prioritise the family after being very selfish for a long time. So I stepped down at the end of May and just took a 6-month sabbatical when travelling with the family, followed the Tour de France in a motorhome through the Alps and watched people getting horns up their backside from a balcony in Pamplona at the running of the bulls, and took the kids to Israel and Palestine, went to the West Bank to a refugee camp and toured the separation wall and got out just over a week before all the troubles blew up last year. So we were very fortunate, but gave the kids some great life experiences, and that was the best 6 months of my life because I felt like I really owed them something for everything that I'd put them through. Even with my downfall, not being able to be a good husband and father was the thing that really broke me the most, because it was placing a lot of pressure. You can imagine for a 6-year-old boy, seeing his dad, this strong formative figure in his life, just crying on the couch would be pretty confronting. And I remember him actually coming up to me one day and just placing a hand on the back of my shoulder and saying, "Are you okay, Dad?" And that's the thing that broke me. So that 6 months of being able to reinvest in the family really taught me that I need to realign my values and not be worried about growth and the pursuit of more money, more success and whatever else, because there's more important things in life. Came back in October 2023, massive identity crisis. I'm no longer Andy from Gippsland Solar, and which I still get abused and called Andy from Gippsland Solar on the street, but I'm not that person anymore. And I just thought, well, who am I now without this? Because, again, people who've been through this, selling their business and having to leave, it's great, you get the payday and whatever else, and you go, shit, what next? Only 40, and I don't really know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. So I had a bit of a dark period again in my life where I was just starting to get a bit, I don't know about depressed, but I was really just directionless again, and I needed something to really spur me on. So I wrote a book, decided to write a book about our journey. Didn't write it with the intention of publishing it, I just wrote it more as a cathartic thing to help me to sleep at night, and then got to the end and someone convinced me to send it to a publisher, and I chased down the best coming I could find, that publisher in Australia, and they read the story and they just said, the world has to hear this story, we want to publish it for Father's Day next year. And now I'm a published author, and I didn't expect to be. So it's quite, it's been quite the journey, and I think it's given me a new sense of direction to help impact on people's lives. The opportunity to come to places like this and tell my story with all of the warts and all the mistakes and the scar tissue, I think that's the most important thing. So really enjoying the opportunity to come out there and tell the story and show people that, it's great, but you have to look after yourself along the way as well. That was my last week with the team. Absolutely loved that whole last week and the emotion and the tears and all the goodbyes, but time to move on to something else. I'm not going to worry about the future of the energy grid in Australia and our future of energy, because I think Philippe covered that so beautifully, so I'm just going to scroll straight through that. Happy to share it with you later on, but I think my thoughts fade into insignificance compared to Philippe's, because he's obviously much smarter at this stuff than I am. But I will finish by talking about the why. So I always tried to remember, and I'm sure a lot of you have read the Simon Sinek books and these types of people that, one thing that Simon Sinek says, start with why. Every business knows what it does. Most businesses know how they do it, but the best ones know why they do it. And we always tried to remember that. And this is my why. So this is a young fella named Orson. He was our first Indigenous apprentice. And my opinion, a bit of editorial here, is that in Australia we've had a horrible history of reconciliation with our Indigenous people. My belief is that in New Zealand you've done it really well. I have so much respect for everything you've done as a country. I think it's a wonderful story and journey you've been on. Australia, I think it's a bit of a stain on a nation, if I'm being honest, and I think there's a long way to go. So we were really big on getting more Indigenous people into our workforce and using them as leaders for the community, because it's really hard. This guy Orson was raised by his auntie, and I won't go into his childhood, but fair to say that he dealt with his fair share of challenges. He was at a point in life where it could have gone either way. Met him as a mature age apprentice and gave him an opportunity. He had a little panic attack on his first day travelling away for a commercial job, and he rang me and he said, I can't do it, I'm coming home. And we said, that's okay, if you want to come home, or just sleep it off, see how you feel in the morning, and we'll go from there. He stayed that week, developed good friendships within the team. He then went on and flourished. So watching his journey, especially when he took 2 more Indigenous apprentices under his wing, guided their journey through, and then he started to come out of his shell. He's a very shy, reserved type who hated this sort of environment would be his kryptonite. He hated it, but he eventually learnt that he has a mission. And he then went on to become a spokesperson for the Indigenous community. He went and had fireside chats at other Indigenous groups around the country, encouraging them to get into renewables, talking about his journey. He got up at our town hall, our company town hall meeting, and had the audience, the crowd in tears in the team, just told a really raw and authentic version of his journey and what this business and the opportunity we gave him meant and what it meant for his family. He was the first person in his family to ever own a home. He got married, he had a child, wonderful success story. And then he went on to become one of the 10 faces of net zero in Australia, a federal government program. So I had nothing to do with that decision. This is the beauty of this, is that I'd long left the business. He's now doing all these things off his own energy, but it's that opportunity that we gave him at the start and that investment that we placed in him when he didn't believe in himself. I think if we can find more people like this and lift them up, ultimately for me, especially living in coal country, I think energy transition is about people. And if you think about the people and the opportunities that it can create for them and their families, I think that's a really important thing for us to always remember. So that's my why, and I think there's plenty more people in our business like Orson, but I hold him up as one that I'm particularly proud of. So I wrote the book. I have only got about 20 copies. I brought 1 box over, which was a real pain in the ass for the guys from Fronis who had to wait for me carting all of my big box of books into the taxi. But I did bring them over, and I'm happy to catch up over at a table in the back corner over morning tea. And like I said, we've got 20 books there, but you can also purchase it online. I've got the ebook. I even just recorded the audio book, and I can tell you that is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, to sit there for 16 hours in a studio just stuffing up the same sentence over and over and over again. And it was like, there's a sentence that hit in an environment, in and in. So if you're going to write a book, get a narrator in to read it for you. That's a hot tip. But yeah, Here Comes the Sun is my book. And there's my contact details, best platforms through LinkedIn. Otherwise, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to tell my story and look forward to connecting with everyone later on. Thanks very much.